welcome back, everyone. For those of you who joined us a little later, we just watched the legendary Queen Mother Moore speak at Greenhaven Prison in 1973. Apologies for misspeaking the date earlier. And then we watched A Case of Reasonable Doubt, Mumia, Abu-Jamal. Next up, we will have a conversation between the curator of this season, Kazembe Balagun, and Tiana Taylor and Jose Saldana from RAPP, Release Aging People from Prison. Kazembe Balagun is a New York-based writer, organizer, and cultural worker working at the intersection of Black radical thought, political education, and social movement history. His essays and articles have been published in venues such as The Guardian, The Independent, and numerous anthologies. Balagun is currently the director of Maysles Documentary Center, a film school, micro-cinema, and Third Space in Harlem. Tiana Taylor, they, them, is the associate director of the Release Aging People in Prison, RAPP campaign, where they help lead statewide efforts to transform New York's parole system and bring elders home. A trained restorative justice practitioner, Tiana grounds their abolitionist work in transformative justice, centering accountability, repair, and collective power over punishment. Shaped by growing up with a parent incarcerated and by a family history deeply impacted by racial violence, they organize at the intersection of policy, political education, and leadership development, believing safety grows from community strength, not cages. Jose Hamza Saldana is the executive director of Release Aging People in Prison, a grassroots community organizing and advocacy organization that seeks to end mass incarceration through the release of aging people in prison and promote racial justice as a means of dismantling the racist criminal legal system. He was released from prison in 2018 after 38 years of incarceration. During the decades of his incarceration, he obtained a college degree. He also co-founded several therapeutic programs, including a Challenge to Challenge, C2C, a comprehensive approach to addressing criminal thinking, behavior, and attitudes. It's my pleasure to welcome Tiana, Jose, and Kazembe to the stage. And just so you know, they also have some incredible merchandise outside in the lobby. So after this conversation, please show your support and love for RAPP. And yeah.
Good evening, Harlem. Thank you. Can we give a hand to Daniela? Such a wonderful curator, and also to all the staff at the Schaumburg Library and all of you who've made it out tonight. It's really an honor and privilege to have been part of the series. And tonight is very special to have these distinguished guests. I just want to say just one word about the first film and the importance of archives. The Queen Mother Moore film that we saw was actually it was lost media. It was found on a VHS tape in Antioch College, amongst other TV shows. You know, back in those days, you used to tape over VHS 1 tapes, and someone just discovered it. And through the work of Video Data Bank in Chicago, they restored it, and actually that's a segment of that. It's actually a longer 56-minute version. But you know, one of the things that's so important about archives is that Video Data Bank right now has been gutted recently with budget cuts. So you just imagine how important these things are to hold on to these archives, because isn't it great to hear Queen Mother Moore's voice in the space? It's like you've been transported back to 125th Street, back to the 20s. I mean, she's talking about knowing and hanging out with Marcus Garvey, you know, and so they see that is amazing. And I guess another part of this too is just like, I mean, something that she says that really resonates with me. She says, you can't steal, brother. You can't steal. You can't steal. No matter how much you try, you can't steal. And I think about that in relationship to time, the prison time that we're talking about tonight, the time that, you know, during the time that she was organizing in 1973, the implementation of the Rockefeller drug laws, but also thinking about the context, also very, very deep context in which Mumia is currently still in, even though he's not on death row, but 40 years in prison. And I guess this brings me to my first question, and I wanted to bring it to the both of you. If you can just describe the work of RAPP a little bit in terms of the relationship to this question of releasing aging prisoners. And just maybe tell our audience, how did your organization get formed, and how does it work in terms of advocacy?
Yeah, so I can get us started, and hopefully Jose will add some too. RAPP is an organization that was started in 2013. It was founded by 3 formerly incarcerated elders, one who is with us right now, Laura Whitehorn, the legend herself, Mujahid Fareed and Kathy Boudin, who are not with us on this physical plane anymore. And they created RAPP because when they were incarcerated, they saw that there was a crisis. Elders were aging in prison. They were having health conditions that were not being treated, and no one was doing anything about it. No one seemed to care. So in 2013, starting with just, a couple of people volunteering their time, RAPP started advocacy and organizing around this, and specifically centering parole justice in this all as well. And we'll get deeper into the parole justice piece. But since then, RAPP has grown tremendously, and not only has RAPP grown as an organization, we've grown just what we've been able to do in terms of freeing people from prison. In partnership with the Parole Preparation Project, who is our sister organization, since 2013, we have changed the parole composition of the parole board and made other changes to regulations in the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision that led to the release of thousands of people in New York State prisons. And the way we did that is organizing our communities. I have been a RAPP member since 2019, so I can talk about my journey as a way to talk about how RAPP organizes. I found out about RAPP because Jose was incarcerated with my dad at Greenhaven prison here, the same one that was in the video that we saw that Queen Mother Moore was speaking at. Jose had come home, and he says all the time, in large part to RAPP and the work that RAPP does. But even though he was home, he was still reaching back in and letting the brothers inside know what was going on the outside. So my dad was like, listen, there's something going on in Albany, you gotta go. And I was nervous. It was my first time being in the Capitol, even though I lived 20 minutes away in Schenectady, upstate. And on the way there, I was thinking, this is nerve-wracking. I've never shared my experience as an impacted child in public ever. And so I was researching the 2 bills that we fight for. One is the elder parole bill, and one is the fair and timely parole bill. I was researching every little piece of it, like, okay, when we do these legislative meetings, I know exactly what I'll say so people will understand. And then we get to the meeting, and first of all, I get to the Capitol, and there's over 600 people there all fighting for parole justice and for people like my dad. And that opened my heart and just shed so much stigma and shame that I had been holding because of my dad's incarceration. Just stepping in the building with all those folks. But then we get to the legislative meeting, and they say, don't worry about talking about the bills, just talk about how much you love your dad. And that was the beginning of a journey of empowerment and leadership building, from being a member and not knowing anything about the legislature to now being the associate director and getting to learn so much under Jose and build community with so many amazing people who have gone through a similar experience as me. And that's really RAPP's bread and butter, is our members and our organizing. And so we do push for policy, and that's a very important piece, but it's like a family here where we get to come together. And in a space that feels, I love how Queen Mother Moore talked about being recaptured. Like, we're already captured. We're not free on the outside because of the racism that we live with every day, because of the legacy of racism on top of that. But with organizations like RAPP, we have a place to find our peace, to find our love, and to find our power, because we do have a lot of power.
Jose, maybe we can follow up. And
Let me just add a couple of things. There was a fourth founder of RAPP, and a lot of times we overlook her. And the fourth founder is Sophia Elijah, the iconic civil rights attorney. She was actually one of the founders of RAPP too. And I just want to add a couple of things that, we advocate for people who have committed serious crimes, convicted, and serving a long prison sentence. And the reason why we focus on them, because if you're serving a long prison sentence, you're eventually going to get old. That's just a fact. If you live. So, and the elders, reclaiming your humanity, and the more important, perhaps, but they want to exclude those serving these life sentences who has saved an entire generation of incarcerated men and women. They want to exclude them. So we want to include them. That's why we are the release agent people in prison. We want these elders, my elders, who taught me. The reason why I am the person I am today is because of them. Sadly, most of them died in prison. But those who remain, we will do our damnedest to get them out. They deserve to come out and continue their mission in our communities, because terms like credible messengers came from us. They didn't come from nobody else. Violence interrupters, these concepts came from us because we developed that moral commitment to help repair the harm in our communities. We developed victim awareness programs to help people heal. We support legislation so that marginalized people, trans people, walking the streets, who are criminalized, put in prison, they do not get the same benefits of other victims of sexual violence or victims. So we support legislation so they can get the same, because look, we do not distinguish. We have no hierarchy of crimes. That's the one thing. We have no hierarchy of incarcerated people. All our elders should be free, and as long as you're languishing in prison, as long as they are prisons, you're going to become an elder. So that applies to every single person in our prison system should have the opportunity to return back to the community, and that's what we strive for.
I was just wondering if you can talk a little bit about some of the people I've always studied in the archives. I've always been prison organized inside the prisons, and I'm talking about Malcolm X. I'm talking about Martin Sostre. I'm talking about Assata Shakur. I'm talking about a whole group of people that created libraries and intellectual foundations. And I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about your experiences in organizing on the inside and how us on the outside can help support those in the inside organizers. I think one of the great things we saw in that first film is that there was a dialectic between Queen Mother Moore and the prisoners that were going on that was so natural. And I'm wondering how do we replace that now? And I also have a question for you. You mentioned stigma. I was wondering, how do you talk to kids, young people today about overcoming stigma in terms of organizing?
So I can start. And I mean, we had a conversation last year at Beyond the Bars that I was involved in, and it was young people who are doing abolitionist work here in New York City. They're doing the work in the Bronx, I believe. And they said, you know what we really need in organizing spaces? We need y'all to listen to us, to trust us, to believe us, and to support us. Don't come to us and prescribe us what we need, but instead listen for our needs. And That is something that I truly believe is the key to organizing young people. Before beginning my work at RAPP, I did restorative justice and mediation at the same middle school that I went to. And while there, doing conflict coaching and other one-on-one conversations with young people, way too many of those people at the same school I went to 15 years earlier said that they could not focus in class, that they were getting into disputes because their parent was incarcerated and they had no one to talk to about it. And they just didn't know what to do with that information. And there are so many young people who are going through that. Someone who I know, Ebony Underwood, once said that children of incarcerated parents are an invisible population. And I can say that that's true, and especially, I'm from upstate New York, the capital region, and I can say we have little resources for our young people. So I think first and foremost, resources and attention, and actually a lot of what was talked about in both of these films had to do with narrative. And I think that the narrative of our young people who are impacted by parental incarceration has been lost. So I think the first start is listening, finding out where they are and talking with them. That's how I actually got involved in this work. I met a woman named Ebony Underwood on Instagram, and she runs an organization called We Got Us Now that supports children with incarcerated parents on it's a national organization, and that is where my first leadership development started. Had it not been for her, you know, who knows if I would be on this stage right now. So I think we have to just listen to our young folks, find the organizations that they have built, and the same way that we learn so much from our elders, we learn so much from the youth. And then when it comes to stigma, I mean, I wouldn't have felt stigma if I had known as a young person that my father's incarceration and the terrible act of violence that he committed was attached to a lineage of racial terror that leads us to a mental state where we do things that are unimaginable. I would have never thought that my dad would do that. He's such a loving dad, spoiled the heck out of me. So I was confused, I was lost. But as I became politically conscious as an adult, then I gained my power. So the more we can educate our young people about our histories at that young age, I think the more that they're gonna build it themselves, you know, once they know what's going on.
You know, when I was arrested, you know, I was given 25 years to life for a crime I committed in 1979, several crimes. At that time, I had 4 children, ages 1 through 8. They had no idea that they would spend the next 38 years of their lives visiting me in prison. And it dominated them totally, where the only one that remembers me being with them home was the eldest, who was, my oldest daughter was 7.5 years old when I was arrested. All my other kids have no memory. The only memories they have of me is in prison visiting rooms. And the impact that that had on them is so devastating. I mean, really, I just learned about it when they all got into their teens. They were so impacted by my absence and coming to visit me in prison that they actually made a pact among themselves that they would not have any children for fear that that child would experience what they experienced. See, at that time, having an incarcerated parent wasn't included as an adverse childhood experience. It is now, but it wasn't then. So they had to go through that with no healing whatsoever, and they're still going through with it. And this is the tragedy. The worst part of this is not us in prison, although that is horrible. is that it's transferred to the next generation. I mean, it really, everything about this carceral system is transferred into the next generation. And they did more than that. We watched, over the decades of in prison, I watched these 16, 17-year-old kids coming in with life sentences. I was in a visiting room. I got a visit one day, and my youngest daughter came to visit me, and she was sitting, or she was at the table, and there was this dude in Greens. He was an incarcerated person. He was sitting, not sitting, he was like close to her table. And in prison, that's a cardinal rule. That's a cardinal violation. You know, you don't just impose yourself on someone else's visit without that person's permission. It's just the way things are. So I was a little tight, and she ran up to me, and I said, who's that cat over there? She said, Daddy, you don't remember him? This kid used to come with his mother to visit his father. And now he's in prison. The mother's visiting him with a life sentence. And this is the face of mass incarceration today. It's no longer a question of numbers. You know, at the height of mass incarceration, there were 72,000 people in our prison system. 72,000. Today it's 35, 34, around that number. So it's no longer about numbers, it's about generations. Multi-members of a family and multi-members of a generation in prison at the same time serving life sentences. And this is, and the foundation of mass incarceration is perpetual punishment, life sentences. And this is why what we try to dismantle, that foundation, that firm foundation that they have of giving out life sentences from generation to generation.
Okay, I have a couple more questions, but I do want to point out that there are 2 microphones in the back. So if people want to ask questions, they can start to queue up and start, you know, while you're sitting down, formulate some questions, you know. I know we're family here, so there's no reason to be shy. There's no such thing as dumb questions. We all learn from each other. We're in the library, right? Fun stuff, right? Yeah. Absolutely. How you guys feeling?
Good.
How y'all feeling? This is illuminating. I'm really enjoying this conversation. I want to pick up something you said, Jose, that I think is really important. You talk about the end of this entire system. And, you know, something that the philosopher Slavoj Žižek said is that sometimes it's easier to imagine the end of the world than to imagine the end of capitalism. And sometimes it's easier to imagine the end of the world in some of these science fiction movies than imagine the end of prison industrial complex. And it seems to me that part of which which emerged since 2005, since 2020, with the George Floyd uprising, there's 2 questions of reparations and abolition. And I'm wondering, how does that look like, you know, currently in terms of your organizing? You know, I know Queen Mother Moore was somebody who was very much, how do you talk about repair, but how do you talk about dismantling at the same time?
We saw this film. We saw the case of Abu-Jamal. And that mirrors just about every case. Imagine that. What they did to that man is what they do to most everybody else. I was arrested for attempted murder by police. Their version is that we shot them first. The reality, what really happened is that they stepped out their patrol car, guns blazing. They just didn't expect return fire. You know, but that's what they sell the public. And you're looking at that, and you have to wonder, can this be reformed? What you just saw, that entire institution of policing, all get together for one man. Everything they did, the lives that they destroyed just to get that one person, they do that all the time. How can you reform a system like that? And then you see the judge, the legal process, how can you really reform that system? And then for those of us who've seen Robert Brooks being brutally murdered on video. It was accidentally caught on video. Otherwise, they would have got away with it. I've seen them. They get away with it all the times. How do you reform that? When everybody, the whole prison industry was down with killing this man. For us, there is no reform. You can't reform we're not trying to reform the system. And I mentioned during the Attica Rebellion, that really wasn't about reforms. You know, there was one person there, a leader, the youngest leader in that group, and he made a statement, and I'll just paraphrase him. You know, they assassinated him. They had to. You know, he says, we have made our demands clear that the only purpose prisons serve is to maintain control. It's the only purpose. And then men died because it couldn't be reformed. After the Attica Rebellion, they went around executing the leaders. And they executed one, they tried to execute one. He tells once he got out, he told the story. They put a bullet in his brain and went on to the next, but he survived. And he told the story that they went around executing people, and no one was ever held accountable for that. So everything connected to this system, every single part of it has to be dismantled. But we know that's going to take maybe decades from now, maybe a generation from now. What do we do in the meantime? We have to get people out of prison, especially us. You know, we were founded by former incarcerated. We were founded by men and women who left people behind who they know their value as human beings. And we had to be committed to getting them out of prison as soon as possible. I'm here before you because of RAPP. RAPP and parole prep exposed the hypocrisy, the racism, the improprieties of the New York State parole system in a report that got a lot of attention, and then the governor seen the report. And instead of reconfirming parole commissioners with law enforcement background who were cited in that report, the governor appointed new commissioners. One of those new commissioners had a social service background, and she released me. So we have to do this work to get people out of prison, and maybe this is a good time to talk about our bills after you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so to start off answering that question, I want to start by saying there was a time when people had said there was no way that enslavement was going to be abolished in this country, and it happened. There was a time when convict leasing was happening, and you know, one person was writing. I was just reading about this in the book, Slavery by Another Name. One person in Alabama was writing about kind of the horrible conditions in the coal mines, people working day in and day out in sweltering conditions, not only being harmed by the mines themselves, the sheer brutality of the work, but also being completely brutalized by the white, you know, basically new masters who are overseeing them. And the way convict leasing works, for those who don't know, is that incarcerated people in state prisons are leased out to private businesses, you know, and not only used for free labor, but completely brutalized in a way that was even worse than enslavement, because now it wasn't a financial burden on these people. If this person dies, if this black person dies, they can just get another one from the prison. They did something back then called waterboarding, where you put a cloth over someone's head and you pour water on it so they can't breathe. It's a torture method. And in the book, Slavery by Another Name, they talk about this being perfected, basically, in the 1920s in those coal mines in Alabama. Well, right now, in 2026, this is happening in New York State prisons. there was a movement that stopped convict leasing, right? And we have to be the movement that stops the torture that's going on right now. People, it's about narrative. People need to understand this is still happening. And I think that that's a big part. Yes, yes. And the last thing I'll say is we're gonna tear it down and we have to build something up too. So I think healing our communities and finding out how we can be in right relation with ourselves, physically, mentally, spiritually, in touch with our ancestors, in touch with that wisdom and knowledge, and in building projects of survival. Like, we need all of that just as much as we need people out of these prisons.
So before we take any questions, I just wanted, you had mentioned at the tail end some upcoming legislation, some bills, some things you're working on. What are you working on now to, and how do we as an audience, as community, get involved?
Yeah, so we have two.
Fair and timely, I'll take over.
Okay. I'll start with our fair and timely parole bill. This one is actually personal to me. So the bill says that anyone who is eligible for parole and everyone who has an indeterminate sentence in New York State is eligible for parole, so a number of years. So for instance, my dad has 22 to life. And so he's gonna go before the parole board for the first time actually next week. He's gonna be going. And after 21 years of prison, everyone thinks, oh yeah, you go before the parole board and they see what you've done, they see who you are, and that's not what happens. Instead of actually judging people for who they are today, the parole board in New York State has become a resentencing body that denies most of the people that go before them. And this has been happening since the war on crime, AKA the war on Black and brown communities, and for us in New York State since the Pataki era, when the horrible Governor Pataki was urging everyone not to release violent criminals ever. And so we're still battling that. And so this bill says that anyone that goes before the board has to be looked at holistically for who they are. Everything they've done, any educational attainments, programs they've facilitated, letters of support, and they'll use that to determine if they're safe to come to the community or not. It's what they should be doing now, but that's what it's for. And so when my dad goes before the board next week, they're gonna see a man who has completed multiple degrees in human services to use when he comes home, someone who has mentored young people, even from inside the prison through the youth assistance program from the outside community, someone who has facilitated victim awareness courses. And most importantly, the person, my dad tragically took someone's life, and the remorse and the guilt and the shame he has felt for that ever since is what propelled him to change his life. And just this year, the sister of the victim of his crime, someone who knew us, knew our family, got in touch with him because she knew someone in the prison who knew my dad, and he said, listen, I wouldn't say this about anyone, but Mr. Taylor is a good guy. You should talk to him because you might really be able to get help. And what she wanted was healing. She realized 21 years of having him be the boogeyman in her life wasn't helping her to mourn the grief of losing her loved one. And so they had visits together, they've had calls, they're now on a friendly level, and she has actually written a letter of support for his release from prison. And you would think that that would guarantee him a ride home, but it doesn't. I've seen people with the same things get denied at the parole board, and so that's why we fight for fair and timely. There are people who have been denied. Jose has been denied so many times. I'll pass it.
And the reason why we call it fair and timely, of course, is that's exactly what it does. It gives a person a fair and a timely opportunity to return back to their family and communities. You can't judge a person or measure a person by what he did or she 38 years ago. That's the fair and timely. You measure him or her by who they are today. The elder parole bill is a bill that provides that if a person has reached 55 years old and has served 15 years, they will be entitled to a parole hearing. We say not a guarantee, but we feel it should be a guarantee, but we don't say that because that scares these legislators. So a person 55 served 15 years will be entitled to a parole hearing and hope. We have death by incarceration sentences in New York, all over the country. You know, sentences like 75 years to life, 100 years to life, or life without the possibility of parole. The older parole bill actually neutralizes these sentences, and what in effect is that they neutralize the foundation of mass incarceration. They stop that perpetual, endless punishment. And the one thing about this bill is that it does not exclude anybody based on the nature of the crime or the length of sentence. It applies to everybody. And we lead the nation with the elder parole, with this concept of no exclusion, because first of all, we wouldn't exclude even if a person did not accomplish a whole lot in prison. We don't exclude because every other movement for racial or social justice in America, the right to vote, the people advocating for the right to vote did not allow exclusions. There are exclusions now, but it wasn't because that's what they fought for. There was no exclusion when we had to abolish slavery. No exclusions. And slavery, the prison system, this entire system is founded on the legacy of slavery. That had to be abolished. We have to abolish this system. That's why we have no exclusions.
So I'm wondering if there's any questions right now from the audience. Like I mentioned before, there's 2 microphones. I see some people in the audience. Shout out to Manifa, my MXGM comrade, and Laura Whitehorn, and a bunch of other folks in the audience. Any questions? Hey, go to the microphone, if you don't mind. Make your way to the microphone. I'll give you a second. I can't hear you. Is the microphones on?
Can you hear now?
Yes,
Oh, okay.
ma'am.
So you fixed it. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being willing to hear Mumia in our hearts, souls, and minds. What do we do emotionally ourselves? This is for you in the middle. I forgot your name especially, okay? Because the left and the struggle is more than 10 days, 10 weeks, 10 years. And it's been how long for Mumia and how long for us to witness it? So we keep going.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That is a really important question, and I think it's literally the most important question that we can answer, because this is a marathon, as we've been talking about. I think that finding out how we can take care of ourselves and heal ourselves is really important, but I think there's a piece of it that people don't talk about enough because it's not fun. But someone once said to me a couple years ago, I've been really struggling. When my dad became incarcerated when I was just 10 years old, and I found out the actual thing that happened when I was 10. I did not tell anyone, and I never cried about it at that age. I didn't cry until I was 16. And as I grew up, as I've become an adult, I've been battling with this deep shame and guilt and this kind of terror in a way to express myself. And I didn't really understand why. And now I am understanding more and more that part of that is that there's deep grief within our bodies. There's deep grief from our ancestors. As I've become more healed, sometimes I get messages from ancestors of really terrifying things, truly. But it's like a legacy of enslavement. So I think that making grief a practice is really important. But that same person that said you should make grief a practice said that if you're healing alone, you've already lost. And that's what they want. And so we have to be healing together. So in that moment when we're sitting alone in our room thinking about how isolated we feel and how overwhelming everything is, we really should make that call. Ask one of our loved ones to come over. And that's what we need.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that. The sister over here.
Hello. Thanks for sharing your stories. Featuring, do you have any hope for the simple fact that there are so many people of colour now in the system? Or are we to assume that they are also part of a lost cause? Do you have any hope for the fact that we have black judges and so many black lawyers now, criminal justice practitioners? What are your thoughts for the future?
You know, I wish that we could salvage something and don't have to start all over again. But everything points to the opposite. It does. You know, when you see the murder, you know, even in the woman's prison, I have yet to meet a formerly incarcerated woman who did not disclose that they were sexually violated. They experienced sexual harm. Not a single one. You know, so, and in the men's prison, you know, that happens too, but the brutality is so prevalent. You know, they come in, even the nurses, they come in as nurses, regular nurses who care for you know, the humanity of their patients. But within a couple of years, they just like the correction officers, just like the prison guards. You saw them in that video, two nurses there laughing like this is a joke, and it reminds you of the lynching that became a picnic for the mob of white families, a picnic. You know, so I have, you know what I have hope with, that I put my faith in? Us as a community. Because I saw, you know, I'm connected to the Attica survivors. You know, two of them were my co-defendants on this case that I did, the Life's War. And I saw 1,200 men, all ethnicity, all races, speaking all languages. All of them refused to leave the yard and were willing to sacrifice their lives rather than leave the yard because the issue that they were raising were not settled. And for the first time that I can remember, I seen principle unity. The unity of principles and purpose exhibited in that yard. And amongst ourselves in prison, you know, we open up to each other. You know, we become vulnerable with each other because, you know, this is our form of resisting. And I say that resistance is healing. And we do this, we become, you know, I got a comrade, Jamel, who I spend so much time with here, you know, and you know, healing is done in a community. So we have created a vision of a community that's about healing. It's not about punishment. So, you know, the hope that I have is what we can pass down to the next generation. But I just don't think we could borrow anything from this system. Nothing at all. I mean, just look at, you know, the Jews talk about how many of their brothers and sisters they lost. We lost almost 20 million people. 20 million people to this slavery. And it's still going on, and now they're trying to deny it. So how can we build on it?
Hello. I thought that the presentation was really wonderful. But the question I have is, I've seen movies like Blood In and Blood Out, which you know that focuses on people that got incarcerated, that was involved with gangs in California. I've seen movies like Juice, New Jack City, and Scarface. As we know that Scarface and Blood In and Blood Out are like cult movies. People really, they thrive on those movies, and I don't think it's a positive image. Like the image that you're talking about positivity and growing and having a faith. Like one of the things that was stated in this meeting was about incarcerated, you know, children, how they're getting in, how the parents being incarcerated, how their children are impacted. I've never heard that, right? So if you look at the movies, you do see that there are characters that are impacted by parents that are incarcerated. but you see that they have this vengeance. They stay with trying to unalive people that had did something wrong in the streets. They do not have an empowerment component. And I think that if we were to move forward, that is something we really have to try to educate people on, because a lot of these movies, right, they're highlighting criminality, right? And I don't think that we have enough movies that highlight hope, that highlight positivity and community. I did see a movie that RAPP presented in Brooklyn that was showing gangs being positive in the community, which I've heard about, right? We don't see the gang members being advocates, right? We just see them as being a problem in the community. So I think that if we could, it would help with stigma by seeing more people that are represented here, that are formerly incarcerated, that are community organizers, that are doing things in the community, because I don't think that I find this very rare and unusual.
Let me point out, look, we do not shy away from intimate partner violence, interpersonal violence. We know that's real in our communities. We tried to attack while we was in prison. And I'll say that the most successful returning citizens in our communities today were products of the therapeutic programs that we developed for ourselves. The most successful, and I'll mention just a few. We got a brother who went through our programs and is teaching law at Cardozo School of Law. Another brother is at Yale University. Another brother's at Columbia, New York, and we have success stories. They're not as much as we want. But then you have the brothers who are just family men. The women also, they're just productive part of a family, of a community. But it's up to us to expand this community, because no one is going to stop the violence in our communities but us. The cops is not going to do it, they're just going to create more violence. No one is going to do it, no one is going to reach these kids. Some of these gang leaders, bona fide gang leaders out here come to me, and I forgot who they were. But he said, I know you may not remember me, but you saved my life. And that, to me, is what gives us hope.
I'll just add really quickly as well. RAPP has been, a huge part of our platform is shifting the narrative and letting people know who our families are, who our people are, in doing these public events. So the same type of event that you saw in Brooklyn, we do those all over the city and all over the state. So if there is a community group, an organization, a church, a library that you think could really use these type of programs, we can work with you to get that done.
We have time for one more question.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. It's got me thinking a lot about alternative justice systems. But one thing I thought was really interesting was usually within prison advocacy and abolition, there's a focus on misdemeanors or individuals who were innocent. So I think it's really radical that you guys are also focusing on crimes, or even people who did do crimes. So I want to know, what would be your what is your stance on prison advocacy groups that kind of ignore but what if they did it, and how does it reshape your ideas of crime and justice? But mainly crime. But hopefully it makes sense.
That's a great question, and I want to focus this question on our community, and to say what has always been the kind of in the master's toolbox is to have us regurgitate false narratives that they perpetuated. So in the 80s and 90s, we heard the myth of the super predator, of the black child, literally Black child being so far gone that they need to be thrown away and locked away and lock the door, throw away the key. And after so many years of the media pumping propaganda into us, I don't know who grew up on Law and Order SVU, but I know I did. You know, it just becomes normal to say, oh yeah, they're not okay. Maybe we should just, you know, leave them be. They did something really, really serious. But I think what's important about, there's a couple of things that are important. Like, number one, the brutal history of this country has a bunch of people who've been brutalizing us this whole time as judges, as law enforcement, and in every other large position in the country, if we're being honest. But number two, if we listen to people like Jose, if we listen to our elders and people in the community, we will learn that the most fruitful lessons come from those who have been the lowest down in their life. I've learned so much grace and love from this man right here, Jamel Stanley Bellamy right there. And he did 38 and a half years in prison. He was a mentor to my father. And I think it takes, and this is something Jose says a lot, you can't teach passion, but it takes all of us people who are impacted, who know. I mean, you sound like you know. We have to let people know this isn't right, and done a lot to be a voice in the criminal legal reform movement to say, you cannot stop the people who have put the most blood, sweat, and tears into this movement, some of which with no chance of coming home from prison, mind you, and leave them behind, and let others get up and that. I think having the conversations are necessary, and we don't think that it's okay at all. And I have one more comment. A group of us from organizations all across the state in all different types of campaigns, parole justice, rights behind bars, different sentencing reform bills, treatment bills, youth justice bills. We're all partnering together in solidarity and going to Albany in the Capitol on March 16th to meet with lawmakers to push our agenda and let them know that they cannot forget about incarcerated New Yorkers while they're doing legislation this year. So please do join us. And there's a code out to join us for our new member info session on March 24th. So please talk to one of us. Usually we leave around 6:30. 6:30, right? We'll get the logistics to you. Okay.
125th Street, 6:30. It'd be 2 buses leaving tomorrow evening now from the state capitol.
6:30 a.m. at 125th Street. Yeah, by the Adam Clayton Powell building, yep.
So y'all heard it directly from RAPP. RAPP is an incredible organization doing all of the work, so if you want to continue to support their work and what they do, keep up with the RAPP campaign. You can also directly support their work outside. They have merchandise for sale, and the proceeds go to all of the incredible work that they do. And yeah, I just want to reiterate, this was such a wonderful, rich, insightful conversation, and I'm so grateful to both of you for bringing all of your knowledge and insight into the Schomburg Center and standing alongside us in this legacy of Black history and coalition building. So thank you one more time to RAPP, and then before we close things out, I do want to say that our next and final Black on Screen as part of Kazembe season is on March 25th. I know, we've been so delighted to have Kazembe here as a guest curator, and on March 25th, we're screening a newly restored version of Audre Lorde, A Litany for Survival, which was just recently restored by Third World Newsreel. And Kazembe will be in conversation with the director, Michelle Parkinson, as well as the restorer, JT Takagi. So thank you so much, and if you want to learn more about RAPP, keep up with them and all the work that they do. So have a good night.
Thank you.